Welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast, the resource for transitional and experienced genealogists who want to create a successful business. I'm your host, Marion Pierre-Louis. Here you'll learn from professionals all around the world who work in the field of genealogy. Are you ready to learn and grow together? Then let's get started. This podcast is sponsored in part by the Association of Professional Genealogists. You can find out more about them at www.apgen.org. Welcome to episode 17 of the Genealogy Professional Podcast. Today we venture west to Utah to get to know genealogist Luana Darby. Luana, welcome to the Genealogy Professional Podcast.
Hello.
Let's get started by having you tell us about yourself and give us an overview of your genealogy business.
Well, I'm a professional genealogist working out of Salt Lake City. I began my genealogy quite a long time ago, and it's been over the period of about 35 years I've developed things. Not all of them as a professional genealogist, but I grew up in Washington State, and something kind of unique was that I lived with my grandmother, and she ran a boarding home for elderly ladies. I got to know these ladies and their stories and kind of gave me a punch towards the realm of genealogy. I went to school at Brigham Young University, and I have a BA in family history, and I also have a master in library and information science from San Jose State University. I have my own business, Lineages by Luana, and I do a variety of things. I lecture, I write articles, and I do research and lookups for other professional genealogists here in Salt Lake at the Family History Library.
Your grandmother inspired you to become interested in genealogy. What was it that made you decide to become a genealogy professional?
Well, it took many years, but I kept seeing the joy of others pursuing their passions with genealogy as I frequented the Family History Library and went to other conferences. I loved hearing the passion in their voice, and I wondered if that was something I could do. And I know I loved a good mystery, and that's what genealogy is all about, solving those mysteries. And that kind of switched me on to could I make this a profession? And I did.
So you said you have a degree in family history from Brigham Young University. Did you do that when you were young, or did you come to that later in life after you'd already been working at something else?
I came to it much later in life. My first degree is in business management financing, and I had used that when my children were young. And it wasn't until we had moved to Utah that I decided this was an option for me and something that I could pursue. And I thought that education was such an essential part of becoming a professional, and I had this opportunity close by, that it was something that I needed to pursue and see through.
So how long ago was it that you got your degree in family history?
I got my degree in 2006.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure if this is something you'd been doing for a very long time. How did you prepare yourself to become a professional genealogist? When you went and got the degree, at that point, did you say, yeah, I'm going to do this as a career? Or were you still just developing your own interest? At what point did you decide to actually make it a career?
Well, I think it was after doing so many different small research projects for friends, family, and neighbors, and pretty much everybody who came to my door, that I realized I was probably pretty good at this, and I could probably make some money. So I think it was at that point, after doing probably a dozen of these, that I thought, this is something I think I want to pursue as a professional.
I'm not familiar with the family history program at Brigham Young University, so I'm going to keep going back to this. I know that they're going to give you a solid foundation in family history research and genealogy. Are they providing any business skills so that when you get out on your own, you know how to run your business?
Well, at the time that I was there, the answer would be no. Now they've integrated that firmly into the program from what I've heard from recent graduates. Coming from a business management background, I felt that I already had that anyway, that foundation.
So what were some of those skills that you brought to your business, from your background, and how have they helped you?
Well, I think that some of the most important ones were how to focus and how to know what I wanted to pursue. I had to have a plan in place, and that was something I learned early on when I was taking business classes. You have to have a plan and put it down on paper and see that plan through. You have to have steps that you will take to have that come to fruition. You have to have goals along the way, short-term and long-term goals. The accounting background definitely helped in setting up client research and keeping up with that and the other financial aspects of being a professional.
So what skills did you lack when you started your business, and how did you overcome that?
Well, one of the ones I lacked, and those who know me will smile at this one, is time management. I have a habit of having time slip away from me rather quickly, and I think that most of us do that. We get on one track and don't realize how much time we've spent on it. That was one skill that I really had to develop, and I've found a couple of things that have helped me with that along the way, and doing things in smaller spurts helped out and didn't have me wandering too far off track.
What was the hardest part of starting a genealogy business?
I think it was knowing where to focus my energy. There were so many parts of genealogy that I loved to do. I loved writing, lecturing, educating, researching, and it was really hard for me to narrow those things down to what I really wanted to focus on. I think taking the time to sort through your passions and strengths and weaknesses is time really well spent.
Do you think it's a natural progression that all genealogy professionals go through at the beginning of their career, that idea of starting doing one thing and just gaining experience until they figured out where they really want to be and what services they provide?
I do think it's a natural progression, and I think it's something that I think most of us will go through, and I think it's good because there are some things that I thought I would be quite stellar at that I really wasn't. I learned rather quickly there were some aspects that I really did not like doing, and I was able to focus my energies on those areas that brought me passion, that brought me success.
Can you give us a specific example of some of those things that you didn't like or that weren't your strengths? Can you tell us a story of a time when you had to do something in that area and it just didn't feel right or didn't work out?
I think one of the hardest things to do is to write, especially on research reports. And I was a good writer, I thought. And I think what happened was I realized quite early on that the long reports, putting all the effort into making these large reports, was not where I wanted to be. So as I worked around this and realized this after doing subcontracting for several different businesses, that this perhaps was not my area of expertise, I found that I worked around it by doing shorter reports, a different type of a narrative. That's what kind of brought my passion back, bringing history into the story rather than just the facts. And I think that kind of ignited my passion again anew for bringing that information to those who may not be professional, that for just the average person out there who may not want to read what I would consider a dry report, that they could see that there's history going on in their stories, could connect and relate to their ancestors.
Can you give us a sense of how your services have changed over time? How has your business progressed? And while you're describing this, also tell us about the subcontracting that you've done. And so give us the big picture of where you started with, how you changed the subcontracting you did, and, end with where you realized you really wanted to be right now.
Okay, well, when I started early on, right out of BYU, I decided that I had to, pay the price of getting out there and working for some of the companies, the larger companies in town. There was Pro Genealogist and Price and Associates and another couple of companies that I wanted to go out and, be a researcher for them, show them that I took my schooling to heart and that I could actually do the work. And I was able to do that not in-house, but as a subcontractor. So it's something that I took home, worked on, and then brought back to the office. As I did that, I was exposed to a lot of different types of research in different areas. I speak a couple of different languages, so that helped expand my horizon in that aspect that I was able to take on some projects that maybe a few other people could not. And as I was going along doing that, I kind of felt constrained a little bit by the time that they would have me return the reports in. It was quick, and I wasn't comfortable with how quickly I had to return some of the reports. I felt like I was having to hurry up and just put just the basic information in rather than giving them a bigger picture of what was going on during that time period. And like I alluded to before, that history behind what was going on when these records were coming out. And so I kind of pulled back on that part, and I started offering my services to other professionals, doing record lookups at the Family History Library in Salt Lake because I was there quite often anyway. And that kind of opened up a lot of different avenues as to where I could research and what I was looking for. I also felt a need and a passion to be able to educate others in the genealogy field. And so I have been able to lecture at the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy and at the national conferences and at some of the more regional areas here in Salt Lake. And I've really developed a passion for putting that fire under not just other professionals, but those who attend the conferences. And now what I have done is I have taken what started as being a researcher and kind of morphed it into more of a service for other professionals, educational writing, and lecturing.
Luana, how did you get started with lecturing?
Well, early on, I really wanted to lecture and share my passion, but I was only teaching classes at my local family history center. I could not seem to get into any other speaking engagements beyond that. I would send in proposals and got rejection letters. But I decided to shadow a professional that I knew that had frequent speaking engagements and asked to become his assistant. What can I do? Can I help you prep your work? And I actually was considered his keyboardist. He would talk about different websites, and he said it was distracting for him to type them in while he was lecturing. Would I mind doing the keyboard? And I did this for several different lectures in different venues, and it got to the point where I was starting to anticipate his needs and which site he was going to go to. And he would say, now we're going to go to this site, and it would already be up on the screen. And I started to learn how he put his proposals in, what he did, and how he had them accepted. I saw how he prepared his syllabus. And I also was able to make connections when we would go back to the room where the lecturers would be preparing their materials and getting ready to lecture. And I was introduced to those individuals as well as the individuals that were making decisions on presenters. And so a few of those individuals gave me chances to lecture in some local and regional venues, and it kind of took off after that point. And I learned, one big thing I learned from him was that you need a repertoire of different lectures for them to select from. And I started building things that I was knowledgeable in and creating not only just the title and a small description, but an outline of that lecture, and then building upon that. And now I have quite a wide range of lectures that I can give and I can turn out rather quickly.
Wow, that's great. I never heard of anybody doing that before. That's the first time I've heard of somebody shadowing specifically for breaking into speaking, and that's such a great idea. And I just want to toss out one other thing since you touched on it, and I just want to make a point so that the genealogists who might consider speaking can learn about this, and that's with the syllabus. Luana had mentioned the handouts that are prepared. One of the tricks that people can do when they're just starting to speak is to take a conference syllabus and look at all of the materials prepared by other people and get a sense of how other people do it. It seems really obvious, but it might not be obvious to people who haven't done speaking in the genealogical community before. So consider that. Maybe your local library might have copies of a syllabus that you could get your hands on. I love that you have found your own place within this field, within this community, and that you're doing what you're comfortable with and able to keep that passion going because of that. Tell me a little bit about how you interface with other professionals. How did that business develop? How are you in contact with other professionals? How do they know that you're there to do this for them?
It started out quite simply by reading a Facebook post or perhaps a request on the APG mail list or one of the other professionals genealogists mailing lists out there, and I figured as long as I was at the Family History Library, I wouldn't mind helping another professional. I know as I have done research, it's those connections that I have made with professionals all around the U.S. and actually around the world that have brought me such great success. And I really felt a need to provide that service. And as I started providing that, I was getting more and more referrals as I built the professionals I was helping. And I really feel like I'm filling a need out there for those professionals who need something quickly, who need something of quality, and that's where my passion kind of lies, making that connection for other professionals. Most of it is by word of mouth, and I don't really go and advertise it much. And I have quite a nice list of others that I assist in getting those records.
Let's just deconstruct this a little bit. Over the years, you've met genealogists at conferences, and I suppose also from the APG list, you've been exposed to genealogists. Are there other areas, other places that you have come into contact with genealogists so that you could build a relationship with them?
I think most of it is at the conferences and different lectures that I've attended, that I have made those connections, that networking. Sometimes it's from a friend of a friend professionally that I am in contact with them. But most of it is just, like I said before, it's word of mouth. And then we eventually will meet up. Many of these professionals I take on work for, I have not met until we see each other at a conference. So that's generally how that has worked.
And I can attest to this because that's how we met, so to speak. I needed help with a lookup for something on microfilm at the Family History Library in Salt Lake, and one of my colleagues suggested your name. And I contacted you, and you said you'd be willing to do that. And that was the start of our relationship.
Yes, it was. I remember it well.
And then that image that you got for me was actually used in a webinar I did for Legacy Family Tree for Jeff Rasmussen. It was on his family, I believe. And one of the things I was so impressed with, I just have to share this with everybody, because it actually changed the way I do things. I always thought that I was pretty good with my systems in my computer. But when I got the file from you of the image that I needed, it was a birth record, and you had everything in the file name. You had the film number, you had everything. And I was so impressed. And I actually started doing that with my own files, because what you do is quite extensive, actually. I mean, you put all the information. It's like a citation right in the file name. And I was like, wow. I said, that's efficient. I started to do that as a result of seeing that you did that. So thanks for that.
No problem. And I found out that was something that kind of morphed into being, because so many people asked for citations, and believe it or not, they weren't all wanting the same type of citation. So I figured that was the best way to give the information, was to put it all in a title and let the person receiving it decide how it would go together in a citation.
Let's talk a little bit about writing and speaking. You said that you really enjoyed lighting the fire under new genealogists, and you're doing educational writing. Tell us just a little bit about that. Give us some examples of what you're doing.
One of the things I like to talk about is your professional development and education. A class I have done before for ICAP Gen, which is the Accrediting Bureau for Genealogy Professionals. I've given a class called Professional Development Brings Financial Rewards. And sometimes we jump into genealogy thinking, I'm a good genealogist and I can just go out there and show my skills. And there's so much we need to build as a foundation underneath that. I also co-wrote in the Association of Professional Genealogists Quarterly on using the GPS and out there as a background for going into educational pursuits. What are some of the things we can do to build up our knowledge of the GPS and put that to work into what we're doing?
Right, I'm just going to mention at this point that when Luana says GPS, she's referring to the Genealogical Proof Standard, because we do have a lot of people in the audience who are brand new, just toying with the idea of becoming a professional, and they might not be familiar with that term. Also, just touching back on what you said about the foundations that people need, and that being a good genealogist isn't enough. Can you just give one or two things that people should consider that they should have in their toolkit besides just good genealogy skills?
Well, I think that we need to have a good education, whether it be self-taught, whether we are out there looking professionally for a course. There are so many ways for us to educate ourselves on genealogy, and it actually bolsters our skills that we have honed doing our own and maybe doing a few others of our friends and family. That's one thing that I really want people to understand. Another thing is that we need to be out there and network, but not even networking, but volunteering. I have found that I have learned so much as a volunteer and putting my efforts into helping others, learning, and participating in conferences and different societies, that actually has helped me as a professional not only learn things, but get my skills to a different level. I think that's 3.
Now, one of the areas that you have some special expertise in, which we haven't talked about yet, is Palatine Research. And you also have some language background to go with that. Can you tell us a little bit about this special area that you have, and what is it all about? Who are these Palatines?
I kind of came into it by just happenstance. I was actually doing a research project in my undergrad years at BYU for my family history degree, and my husband's aunt had asked me to do some research on this family from Pennsylvania. I had no idea what Palatines were, but she had mentioned they're Palatines, and I said, okay. So as I was doing this research in Pennsylvania, I started learning a little bit more about these Palatines that were Germans that came over during the 1700s, a little bit into the 1800s. They were given that name by the clerks. Many of these individuals came from what's called the Palatinate region of Germany, which is down in the south, more to the southwest area, near Rhineland over there. And when the clerks started seeing all these Germans coming in, they kind of just gave them the nickname Palatines. So it was kind of referring to a lot of those individuals who came over in larger groups during that century, during the 1700s. The research is kind of spotty here and there. There are a couple of good resources out there, and most people take their research back to the Pennsylvania German Pioneers books by Strasburger and Hinke, where they were given ship lists. And these Germans were recorded possibly 3 times: when they left their country of origin, when they were come to the United States, and then once again when they had to do their oath of allegiance. So they might be on 3 different lists, and that's where these names are coming from. But there's not a lot of information on these individuals out there. And how I focused my research on the Palatines is I've taken time to learn those experts like Annette Burgert, Hank Jones, a lot of these other individuals out there that have worked on them. And I've created an index of my own back to these works, having these individuals, which ship they came on, where they were located in Pennsylvania, and possibly their place of origin, back to the original work of these experts, so that I can quickly find those individuals again and possibly locate others that are on those ships.
I have Palatine ancestors, and I guess I haven't done a lot of research in this area at all because people like Hank Jones have done the research. But I did what some people typically do, and that's just to focus on their ancestors. And so my Palatines came over in 1710, and they went to New York. And it has only just come to my attention this week from somebody else and now from you that there were Palatines that went to Pennsylvania. I had no idea. Tell me a little bit about the Palatines. I always thought the Palatines just arrived at one point, around 1710. How come we see Palatines until early 1800s?
Well, again, it comes back to the name that these Pennsylvania clerks gave them. It's been given to the wide range of these Germans coming in to Pennsylvania mostly at that time period. And the research project I did as an undergrad, it was my senior project. The majority of these individuals were actually not from the Palatinate region. They were from a wide range of locations in Germany, but the terminology Palatine has been given to them. And it's mostly for the individuals who ended up in Pennsylvania at that time period.
And just so that we can kind of close this full circle, at what point do we stop calling them Palatines? Like, I have ancestors who came over from Germany in the 1850s, and they were, of course, not referred to as Palatines. So at what point do we stop referring to them as Palatines and start referring to them as Bohemia or other names like that?
Well, I find in most of the literature that is out there, it is between 1805 and 1810 that we stop referring to them as Palatines. And I believe it's because of how Germany and the German kingdoms out there were changing at that time period. But they had stopped calling them Palatines about that time period.
And tell us a little bit about your language background.
I grew up with a German-speaking grandmother, so I learned German about the same time I learned English. I didn't use it a whole lot after I was 7 years old because my grandmother passed away, and my parents actually didn't speak German. My father, whose mother was a German speaker, he refused to speak German, so I didn't, again, connect with it until I was in high school, but I took it in high school and in college and tried to keep it up there. I also took French in college and found out I had an affinity for languages there. I served a mission for the LDS Church in Argentina, so I picked up Spanish there. And I picked up bits and pieces of some other languages that are very similar to Spanish, German, and French. So I can pick up basic words as I go along the records.
Fascinating. It's a big help when you have that language background behind you. Earlier, you had mentioned that volunteering is very important and you can really grow in your career by doing volunteer work. How do you balance your time between paid work and volunteering?
Well, that's a really tough one. I have learned through the School of Hard Knocks that you cannot spend all of your time volunteering, even though there are some great projects out there. I have balanced it down now to where it's 15 to 20% of my time at most, and it does fluctuate throughout the year. I like to be involved with different societies and groups just because I learn so much from them, and it actually helps me make connections. As a professional genealogist, I make a lot of connections through these type of activities. I think one of my biggest joys was when I was a president of the Utah Genealogical Association during the very, very large NGS conference here in Salt Lake. I learned a lot. I got burned out, but I also learned a lot and made so many valuable connections through that conference, and I'm grateful for that.
Luana, what's the most fun project that you've ever worked on that you can share with us?
Oh, wow. I worked on a couple of really fun projects, but I think one of the projects that was more recent was a gentleman had come up to me and he said, I want my very own Who Do You Think You Are experience. Now, that's taking it from the show that's been out there. He goes, I want to take my family, rather it's his wife's family, back in time and pull them back forward and find some cousins in the village where they are from. And this happened in 2012, and he was going to the Olympics with his wife and then wanted to go over into Germany to have this experience. I learned a lot about time management. I also learned a lot about traversing the records back in time and then bringing them back forward.
Were you able to make that cousin connection for him?
We were so excited. He wrote me this most wonderful email afterwards, and he said he met a 93-year-old cousin of his wife's, and he was actually able to meet, it was a very small town in Germany, and he was able to meet many of the individuals there that knew the family. Some people pulled out pictures from some family members in the past. He was able to go to the church where a lot of these individuals were baptized, married, and buried, and his wife was thrilled. I'm working on another project for him in Switzerland, a little bit harder, but this is on his line.
That's so cool. That's so neat that he said, I want the Who Do You Think You Are experience. That's really fun. Let's take a quick break to hear a message from the Association of Professional Genealogists.
Hello. This is Kimberly Powell, President-elect of the Association of Professional Genealogists. APG is an international membership organization dedicated to supporting all individuals in the business of genealogy, whether you're an archivist, librarian, educator, writer, or researcher. Our 2,600 members include genealogists at all stages of their professional careers, from those just starting out to some of the field's most renowned leaders. Learn how to grow your business and network with other professionals through our educational webinars, informal mentoring groups, active discussion lists, the APG Quarterly, and our annual Professional Management Conference. Visit us online at apgen.org to learn how we can help you on your professional journey and how you can help us advance public awareness and understanding of the profession of genealogy.
All right, Luana, we're going to shift gears now, and we're going to enter the lightning round. And we're going to quicken the pace, make things a little bit more fun. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What was the one thing you were most afraid of in starting your business?
Finding clients. I thought I would have to cold call them and pick up a phone and just find them that way.
And is that what you did at the start, or did you do something else?
No, I decided to network with other professionals and put myself out there to hang out my shingle that way. But I thought, coming from a real estate background, I had that also behind me, that I thought I would have to pick up the phone and just start calling people. I was afraid that I wouldn't find enough clients to be able to make it viable as a professional.
And networking is definitely the way to go. What is the best advice you've ever received?
I think there's two things, really. One is communication, and that's with the clients and other professionals. Keep those lines open. Someone who doesn't answer an email, that kind of brings things to mind. And the other one is to really, really network.
What is one specific action listeners can take in the next 24 hours to help them transition into a genealogy career?
Take time, set out your strengths and your weaknesses, see what things you really enjoy and have a passion for, and head yourself in that direction. Don't make it so big that you can't overcome what you need to do.
Do you have a productivity tool or an app that you love that you can share with the audience?
Well, I love Dropbox, and I've used that ever since it first came out, and I guess I'm probably repeating what some of your other professionals that you've interviewed have said, but I love Dropbox. It keeps me in contact with my clients. It helps me stay organized when I'm doing research for myself, and even as I participate in my volunteer activities, it keeps me straight and organized, and I think it's just a fantastic tool to use.
What is your preferred social media channel?
Okay, I'm really bad at social media, but I use Facebook mostly, and that's how I interact with others. But I'm starting a blog, so I'm putting myself out there.
If you can recommend one book for our listeners, what would it be?
I love Professional Genealogy, Elizabeth Showen Mills, with all those different sections on what you can do as a professional. I still keep going back to it, and in fact, just went back to it to work on a contract. I wanted to be more specific and clear in my contracts that I was using with my clients, and again, pulled out my book. I use it all the time.
I agree. It's a great book, but you're going to have to give us another book, because everybody gives us that book. Can you recommend a book that has to do with palatines? Like somebody like me who is woefully ignorant. Can you recommend a book that talks about the history of palatines in America?
There aren't any that aren't terribly dry. There really aren't. But I use like I said earlier, the Pennsylvania German Pioneers book, Strasburger and Hinke. If you're going to have one that you use for it, it's the one I keep going back to. It has the ship lists of all those individuals. And even if your individual is not on there, it is something you can use. If your individual's on there but no other research has been done on this individual, look at who's with him in those lists and figure out where they have come from. Perhaps there's been some research done on them. And I have found in the past that this is the clue. They usually stood together in line to be enumerated on those ship lists, and again when they swore their oath of allegiance in Pennsylvania. So it's a great lead even if you don't have any more information on that individual.
All right, let's do a little tips from the pros. With you being the pro, your topic today is networking. Can you provide 3 quick tips for our audience how they can get involved and embrace networking?
Okay, there's a couple of ways. Go to conferences, interact with individuals out there during your lunches, during the classes. Sit next to someone and say, "Hi, where are you from? Wow, you're from New Jersey. Do you ever do research in New Jersey?" You have to put yourself out there at your table at the luncheon. Introduce yourself. Tell what you do. Perhaps you can switch business cards during that time period. Another way is to volunteer. Volunteer to help out perhaps at the APG booth at a conference. and stand there. You meet an incredible number of people at those booths and are able to network that way as well. And another way is to take classes through these institutes. I have found so many people that I now interact with and network with in the classes that I've taken, the courses, the deep and depth courses, that I will have not only as friends, but connections with out there in the communities.
I think one of the benefits of these institutes is that you're in a classroom, a small classroom, relatively speaking, for a whole week with the same people. When you go to a conference, you might bump into somebody and have a nice conversation for half an hour. But when you're at an institute, you have a whole week to get to know people. And you can really build some great relationships that way.
I agree. I think the institutes, because of their in-depth going into certain subjects, you all kind of go through it together. It's like boot camp together. You learn at it. And I think that one of the things you notice in some of these courses that you take are that not only does the instructor have some insight into some of these subjects, but also the class members do. I just took a course in land records at the Salt Lake Institute of Genealogy with Pam and Rick Sayer, and people were bringing up examples. Well, I have this kind of a land record. Could you tell me more about it? And we went through it as a class. We all learned. Or else someone else said, I've worked in those type of records. So you kind of have that camaraderie and that interaction with those individuals, and it actually builds a lifetime of friendships.
Luana, give our audience one parting piece of advice and then tell us how we can get in contact with you.
Well, my piece of advice is to network, but also if you are just starting in becoming a professional, find a mentor. Find someone out there that you admire that's doing something that you want to do. Contact them and ask them for their advice. I think that our genealogy colleagues out there are wonderful people and so willing to help those who are climbing up the ladder. You can get a hold of me by emailing Luana Darby at gmail.com, or when my website goes back up, it's down for a little maintenance right now, lineagesbyluana at gmail.com. It's also lineagesbyluana.com out there.
Luana Darby, thank you so much for coming on the Genealogy Professional Podcast today.
Thank you.
There was a lot of information packed into that interview with Luana Darby. We learned about all sorts of things, from networking to business skills and the foundations that you should have for your business. We talked about subcontracting and finding your own niche, following your passion, and really harnessing your strengths and not your weaknesses. And we talked about how to break into public speaking in the genealogical community. So there was lots of great information there. One of the things that was a theme throughout the conversation with Luana was the concept of networking. And I've talked about networking in the past quite a bit, and this is what we're going to focus on for our action item today. This is a little bit different angle on networking, but it still falls under the realm of networking. What I would like you to focus on for your action item this week is providing value to people. When you receive an email or you receive a communication and it's not relevant to you or it's not something that you do, how do you respond? And I think when we get these emails, sometimes we just ignore them because they don't really have anything to do with what we do. And in fact, we might even consider them an inconvenience because it's not what we do, and it won't lead to business because that's not your niche or your skill area. But this is an opportunity, a networking opportunity, a business development opportunity for you to provide value to somebody who has contacted you, whether that's a colleague or a complete stranger who has sent you an email. I am going to give you 2 examples from my own personal experience about how I do this. Last week, I gave a webinar about targeting and finding new genealogy clients. And after that webinar, somebody emailed me and said, I would love it if you would do a webinar on Pinterest, which is the social media site where you pin photos. And I emailed her back and I thanked her for her suggestion, but I said, that's not really my focus. With the genealogy professional, I really want to focus in on business. And technology, while I love technology and I love to put technology to work, it's not really my area of strength. So I could have left my email just like that. But would that have been very helpful to her? No, it just would have disappointed her. So instead, I decided I'm going to provide her with some value. So I said, you know who is very good at technology is Thomas McKenty. I don't know that he's done a Pinterest webinar, but he's a perfect person to do one in the future. That's great, but that's not enough value either. Okay, so the next thing I did was I went to Legacy Family Tree webinars, where Thomas has done a lot of technology webinars, and I provided the direct link to his presenter page on Legacy Family Tree webinars, and I put that in the email so that she wouldn't have to go looking for that. Thomas has also started a new business called Hack Genealogy, and he does genealogy boot camps. Now, he hasn't done Pinterest yet for that, but he may do it in the future. Maybe he'll do a technology focus. So I went to Hack Genealogy, and I got the URL address for that, and I provided her with that. So I responded by saying, no, I'm not likely to do Pinterest because it's not my area of expertise or my focus in my business. But here is somebody who does do that, and here is exactly where you can get that information. So this is a form of networking, a form of communication, a form of providing value to somebody. When you get these emails, I want you to think about how you can respond to that person and help them get what they need, even if you can't provide it. Now, here's another example, and I do this all the time. When these TV show producers, they send out emails and say, oh, is there a researcher who can go in to Boston and get this record for me tomorrow? It's always like that when you get these random emails from somebody you don't have an established relationship with. What I do in a case like that is, because I don't want to drop everything and run into Boston to pick up a record for a TV producer. It's not in my business plan. So what I do in cases like that is I know that TV producer is also sending the email to lots of other researchers. Don't think I'm not aware of that. But what I do is I will put out the request on my local APG chapter board and say, hey, is there anybody that can fulfill this request? Because maybe there's somebody out there who she didn't email who might be able to actually do the job. I'll email the TV producer back and I'll say, hey, I'm sorry, I can't do this for you, but I've got the word out in the street, in the community, and I'm waiting to see if anybody can do that for you. Now, in most cases, it will happen that the researcher will find somebody on their own because they've sent that email out probably to 10 people. But it lets the TV producer know that you're going the extra mile to try to help them. This is how you establish relationships with people. This is how you build rapport. So even when you have an opportunity that's not an opportunity, turn it into an opportunity by providing value. Don't just say no to somebody. Don't just ignore somebody. Find out how you can get them as close to the information that they need. So your task for this week is to check your inbox. Are there any of these emails sitting around? Maybe they're a week old, 2 weeks old, maybe 4 weeks old that you haven't responded to. Take this as an exercise to practice providing value to people and creating further opportunities for your business. It shows that you're professional. It shows that you're responsive. It shows that you want to help. That person will go back to you when they have something that fits into your niche. Before I end, I want to give a shout out to 2 folks who left reviews on iTunes for the Genealogy Professional Podcast. The first is Beth Benko, and she writes, "This is a very engaging and informative series of podcasts. I love all the practical advice for aspiring professional genealogists. It is so helpful to hear from a variety of professionals with different specialties." Thank you, Beth, for leaving that review on iTunes. That's so awesome to hear from you, and I really appreciate that. The other one was left by username Lou926, and it says, "I have very recently decided to turn my genealogy passion into a business, and the Genealogy Professional Podcast has been more helpful than I can say. Not only are the stories from the guests both interesting and informative, but Marion is a truly gifted show host who asks all the right questions and pulls out all the right lessons and tips from the stories. New shows are the highlight of my week because I know I will learn something I can really consider and use in relation to my own fledgling business. And it's a great listen for veteran pros as well. So thank you so much for that shout out on iTunes. I really appreciate it. When you leave a review in iTunes, it's actually a really tremendous help for the show because it helps the podcast have a higher ranking in iTunes. And then that's how other people can find out about the show, because you have to have you know how these things work. You have to have a higher ranking before anybody can see you. So I really do appreciate the folks that have taken the time to stop by and leave reviews for the Genealogy Professional Podcast. It's really awesome. Thanks so much. Until next week, so long.